Sony president, COO, and CFO Hiroki Totoki says PlayStation needs to have more detailed checks and gates, such as more user tests to prevent situations like Concord from happening again. This guy, I've talked about him plenty before. He is the man behind like the shift in PlayStation over the last year or so. What happened is he was brought in late last year, it seems, to do a comprehensive analysis of PlayStation as their new CFO. And so he looked at PlayStation and he ran through the numbers, all the while they're finishing up Concord and all that. He is not a gamer. He doesn't know what a good video game is versus a bad one. What he knows are the numbers. He knows the business side of it. He knows what he's looking for when it comes to margin, when he is coming to profitability, expansion, cap rates, all that. He's the numbers guy. And he came into PlayStation and he was livid with everything. What he came in and saw was a corporate nightmare with a business like gaming. Whenever you have console generations, that's sort of a reset, okay? So with all of these different projects, the goal for each of them should be to increase margins as time goes by. So if you have, say, the PlayStation 5, and you're selling it at a flat rate of $500, but you spend all this money on it, and we say that you're generating this amount of money over time, you might initially start with negative margins. Okay, this red line is your margin. So you might start losing money. You're losing money in here. You're selling the console at a loss, but you're going to make it up on the back end because you're going to sell software, right? So your goal is to, you can eat that. You can have negative margins initially, but eventually this needs to spread and you need to start making more and more money. This needs to get bigger as time goes by. The margins need to widen as it becomes cheaper to produce the consoles, as you get more and more games out there, a larger install base that's downloading more games, which is what we see traditionally with like the Nintendo Switch. There were plenty of reports that initially the Switch was sold at a loss. It was sold for $300 and it cost them like $330 to get to users, to ship it, to manufacture, market it, all of that. But over time it became cheaper and it started costing them like maybe $215, maybe $180 as the years went by. And then also the user base was getting so huge that people were buying more and more games, and they were buying games through the digital store place where they had tons of markup and where they had a ton of margin. So over the Nintendo Switch's life, it started negative, but it ended up with a huge margin on the back end. And it was great. And it's made them tons and tons of money. What Hiroki Totoki saw when he came in to PlayStation and analyzed their books as part of this corporate oversight check on it, he did not see this red line. What he saw was something more like this, we'll say yellow line. So he saw that they started here and then they started making progress, but then the margins started tightening. And this is not at all what you should be seeing. And the story and reports that were coming out at the time was, we are at 6% margin. So the gap between these two lines represents 6% when he did his analysis. So, not where you want to be. For each dollar, they're making 6 cents. Not where you want to be. And at that point in the generation, based on previous generational performance, they should have been at 20% margin across the whole PlayStation business. Some areas it's going to be more than others. On the store, it might be 30. On the consoles, it might be 5. It's going to be different. But across the business, it should be 20 at this point in the generation, but they were only down at 6. And so this guy comes in and is like, what are we doing? Something has gone horribly wrong. How you get to this is either your margins are really tight and you're not selling games for enough money, or you're spending way too much money, because that's how you increase margins. You either charge more, this is our margin box. You either charge more, which means that your cost, if it's $5 and you're selling it for $5, that's going to come out to a 0% margin, right? So you can change this by increasing the price you sell it for. Sell it for $7, you just made $2. Easy peasy. Or you cut costs and you still sell it for $5, but maybe you can make your little widget for $3, in which case you're still at that $2 margin, right? So to be at 6% when you should be at 20 means that either your top line is too big, or it means your bottom line, or your top line is too small, or your bottom line is too big. And it was definitely this. A little alien wearing a human mask named Jim Ryan, he was spending like his life depended on it. He was greenlighting billions of dollars in acquisitions, which for PlayStation is not that easy to do. I mean, PlayStation is not a Microsoft at all. Microsoft is gigantic, and they're worth like $3 trillion with a T. Okay? With a T. $3,000 billion, effectively. Massive. And so they can spend $7 billion on an acquisition, and it's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. Like, they can eat it, and even if it doesn't go super well, they're okay. For Jim, spending $3.5 billion on a company like Bungie is a massive deal, and they need to be sure that that's going to work out. Greenlighting $200 million on an acquisition of Firewalk for an upcoming 5v5 hero shooter is a huge, huge deal. That's a big deal. I mean, that takes a lot. And you got to be very confident that that's going to work, and at the very least return that revenue and return that return that cost and bring the money back. And so his excessive spending was driving margins down because more money was being spent than was being made. And that was starting to really, really tighten the numbers, even as other things were growing. They've seen other growth in other areas. They've seen growth in like subscription spending, for example. People are spending more money on PlayStation Plus than they ever have before. People are spending more money on digital sales of games through the PlayStation Store than they are on physical sales, which also widens their margins and helps them. They make a lot more money that way than if you buy physical. So they were making a lot more money elsewhere, but they were hemorrhaging money in all of these other projects, which were these live service pursuits, which I think we all know have not really gone many places. They've had one success, which was Helldivers 2, which seemingly took them by surprise, which is why it was not over monetized out the ass. They didn't really expect it to blow up in the way that it did. And so they continue to double down. All the while, we've seen Bungie continue to hemorrhage money. They've had one good expansion, but one good expansion does not pay for 5 terrible ones that lost a ton of money. So they kept losing money. The Bungie acquisition was seemingly a massive mistake. They have lost so much money on them. It's unbelievable. So Hiroki Totoki looks at all this. He looks at the numbers and he's like, hey, Jim, what is this? And I imagine basically like, at the end of the Hunger Games where the game master comes in and sees the bowl that's been left for him, and it's the berries that are poisoned. I imagine something like this happened to Jim Ryan. He came into the office and he sees this bowl of poisoned berries, and the message is, you're done. Like, you screwed this up. You can either take this and head out yourself, or we're gonna do it. Yeah, this is the Moist Critical movie. Yeah. So I think what happened is that Jim was basically told, you screwed this up. You're going to retire, right? You really don't like those long flights between London and Japan. You really want to spend more time with your family, right? And Jim was like, oh, yes, bloody well. Yes, I do. Cheerio. Whatever. I can't do a Jim Ryan impersonation. I've said before, he looks like an alien wearing a human mask, so maybe it should be Zorton, clip clop, Zombo, and then he like beep boops out of the room. That's probably what happened. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Jim Ryan happened to retire at the exact moment that Hiroki Totoki comes in and does an overarching review of their financials. I think that's pretty, there's not a lot of coincidences in corporate in the corporate world. A lot of the time, if you think there's a connection, there is. This is why I was able to like predict the acquisition of ZeniMax. It's why it was very clear what was happening with Activision Blizzard when Bobby Kotick started talking about his buddy relationship with Phil Spencer. Like, there's not a lot of coincidences in the corporate world, and I think in this case it's pretty clear what happened to Jim. He screwed the business up, and Hiroki Totoki was like, "This isn't working out. I think you're tired. I think you need to go spend time with your family." I think that's what happened, and he was offered the berries. And then, you know, we saw the launch at the same time. We saw Cancellations. We saw Cancellations of the Last of Us online game. Behind the scenes, there were cancellations of multiple projects that never saw the light of day. Because you remember they said they were working on 12 live service games. Now it's down to like 6. And a lot of them we never saw. So there were a lot of other ones behind the scenes that were canned that we still have not heard about. So I think Hiroki Totoki came in and was like, we're going to clean this up. And he was being told by Herman Hulst, well, we have Concord, and that is going to be amazing. So don't cancel that one. It's basically done. We're going to put it out this summer. So just wait. It's going to be awesome. And so they didn't cancel that one. They waited on that, and it ended up being an unmitigated disaster. Somehow, though, Herman Hulst still has a job, and I don't know how on earth that happened, but he still has a job somehow, and they're continuing to double down on the live service stuff. However, they canceled Concord fully after backing out of it. It looked like they were about to relaunch it, because you remember there were stories of Concord being worked on the back end. There were still updates coming to the Steam version of the game, and so people were still working on it. They were like sending out updates. And it seemed like they were preparing for a free-to-play launch, that they were going to launch it free-to-play and try to make some money back that way. They were going to introduce like a bigger game store and try to monetize it that way. And then the ruling came down that, nope, it's done. We're out. No more. And they shut down the studio. They shut down the game. And now, amazingly enough, Concord, which we played just months ago, Concord is now lost media. Isn't that crazy? I still have it installed on my PS5, but it's lost media. It's gone. You can't play it. How crazy is that? It's wild. It's wild. I mean, at the very least, shout out to the fan who sent me that Concord t-shirt. That thing's awesome. So the best thing that came out of this. But I think that there have been a lot of screw ups behind the scenes at PlayStation. We probably are only going to hear about in like a few years. I think there's a lot more stuff happening behind the scenes that we still don't know. And if we saw Concord, and if Fair Games ends up, that's not the right name. Fair Game $, if that ends up seeing the light of day, just imagine how bad some of the stuff that was canceled was going to be. This is what I always tell people. I'm like, they cancel a lot of these games, and people often are like really bummed about it. You know, Star Wars 1313, like we hear these stories about that stuff, and we're like, that was such a waste. I wanted that game so bad. Like, remember, these companies are willing to put out a lot of garbage. So how bad does a game have to be for them to cancel it? You know? Like, the Last of Us online game. They worked on that for like 4 years. They were working on it as far back as 2019 when it was still supposed to ship with the base game. And they decided to cancel that after all that time. If they thought they could make a single dollar on it, you think that they would have put it out instead of just canning it. The fact that they just shut it down and it never was even revealed really makes you question, like, what was it like? You know, it might have been cool in some aspects, but what was so horrifying that they couldn't handle? Moroccan Mulch, isn't that a bad argument about 1313 since Disney canned everything when it got Star Wars? Yeah. No, you're totally right. 1313 is not a great example, because that, like, basically Bob Iger came in, and Bob Iger was like, I don't think we should be making our own video games anymore. We should outsource everything to EA. They do it better. And so he just canned everything. There was a Pirates of the Caribbean game that also is like lost media that was like shown off. People saw it. Armada of the Damned, I believe, is what it was called. Yeah, 2010, I think. Like, these games were shown off and never saw the light of day. I made a video on it that Jacob and I worked on The video tanked and didn't do super well, which is too bad because I was really proud of it. But they showed off all this crazy stuff. They showed off gameplay. It was gonna be Black Flag before Black Flag. And this thing like never saw the light of day. It got canned and destroyed, and it's such a waste. Such a waste. Yeah, I agree. I think Star Wars 1313 is not a great example. Maybe a better example is like the cancellation of the Last of Us game, you know. To circle back to all of this, to the central point that we were making, Hiroki Totoki has said, quote, "We need to repeat those gates more so that we could have caught and determine whether that will be accepted by the users or not. We need to have more information that will enable us to make more sound decisions. Looking back at the past, I think we need to go back to the basics and make it really stronger. We should have done those gates much earlier than we did. Also, we have a siloed organization. So going beyond the boundaries of those organizations in terms of development and also sales, that could have been much smoother." Says they also need to select the right launch window while looking at other first and third party titles as to maximize and not cannibalize sales, which is true. But basically, like they want to have some checks and balances and things set up in a way where they do not have a game like Concord come out where it's just so totally not in touch, in touch with anybody. If you had talked to any casual gamer, they would have told you that Concord was a bad idea. How did it end up getting $400 million thrown at it then? And it's because like those people that were making those choices had no idea what they were doing. They were out of touch with the base. And their goal, Hiroki Totoki's goal, is to have more checks and balances in place so they can find out whether this is a good idea years before they end up wasting tons of money, which is what a good manager does. A good manager should look at something like Concord and be like, how the hell did this happen? It wasn't like it sold disappointingly. It didn't sell. It was not that it didn't connect with as many people as we wanted. It didn't connect with anybody. On the grand scheme of live service games, it was a cataclysmic failure. Like there literally is nothing even comparable on this scale. Lawbreakers, there were people that really loved the gameplay and thought that it was really compelling. It just launched at a weird time where it was right next to Overwatch, and they didn't know how to market it next to Overwatch, and so it flopped and failed. But that did not have anywhere near the amount of money and investment behind it as Concord, you know. And more than anything, I think Doc Glock is right. I think that there was something that happened with Concord where it was turned into an example. It was almost like sacrificed at the altar of gaming, where people wanted to like demonstrate that it was like, this is, we want to reject this. This symbolizes everything that we hate about modern gaming, you know? Anyway. We'll keep an eye on it. They're going to continue pushing out live service stuff. They have more live service stuff planned. They have a big ol' launch of Fair Game $sign set up. So we'll see about that. He took my thing.